Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend Deku Fanfics with another fiction. What if Deku had the power of the entire anime world? Now, before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. If you more want video like this, now let's get into the fanfic. Years ago, human beings started to develop powers, or quirks as they were called. As more and more humans developed quirks, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Those who were born with powerful quirks used them to gain influence and control, altering the course of history. The first true villain to be labeled a world monster was known as All for One, or a foe. He possessed the terrifying ability to give and take powers at will, a quirk that made him nearly invincible. With this unparalleled power, he became a shadowy overlord in the underworld, orchestrating crime and chaos with ruthless efficiency. In a few short years, a foe almost had a complete grip on the world, his influence spreading like a dark plague. However, in response to this monstrous tyranny, a resistance began to form. Individuals with powerful quirks rose up against him, risking everything to challenge his reign. Their numbers were initially small, and they had to be exceedingly cautious with every move they made, for a foe's network of spies and informants was vast and ever watchful. Among these brave souls, there was one boy who was special, a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. This boy possessed a quirk that, with time and nurturing, could potentially match the demonic power of a foe. His name was not widely known, for the safety of the world depended on his anonymity. He was the current holder of One for All. One for All was a unique quirk, passed down through generations, accumulating strength and potential with each new bearer. It was a power designed to stand against a foe, a spark of light meant to pierce through the shadows of his tyranny. Many good people sacrificed themselves to ensure the boy's safety, moving him from place to protect him and allow his power the time it needed to cultivate. They shielded him from harm, knowing that his potential was the key to a future free from a foe's tyranny. Extreme caution was exercised at every step. A foe had spies everywhere, eyes and ears hidden in the most unexpected places. The resistance used every trick in the book to keep the boy hidden, employing false identities, decoys, and secret safe houses. Despite their best efforts, information about the boy's whereabouts occasionally found its way to the monster. One quiet evening, the small town that had become the boy's latest refuge found itself under an ominous shadow. The air was still, the usual sounds of life replaced by an eerie silence. The residents, unaware of the dark forces closing in, went about their routines, blissfully ignorant of the danger lurking on the horizon. The oppressive silence of a hot summer afternoon was shattered by the arrival of a dark convoy. All for One, a foe, the grand ruler of the villainous underworld, stepped out of a sleek, black vehicle, his presence casting a chilling pall over the otherwise peaceful suburb. Flanking him were a few of his most powerful henchmen, their sinister auras matching the malevolence of their leader. A foe arrived at the edge of the town, his presence a dark storm on the peaceful landscape. The few people who saw him were struck with a primal fear, an instinctual recognition of the predator in their midst. His henchmen flanked him, their menacing forms casting long, foreboding shadows. A foe turned to one of his henchmen, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Are you sure the boy is here?" The henchman nodded, his expression a mix of fear and loyalty. "Yes, my lord. Our contacts within the government have discreetly verified the information. Even if the pests found out, they have no time to move him." A foe's lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "Good. Let's go." A foe and his henchmen strode through the town with an air of unchallenged dominance. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The peaceful suburb, with its quaint houses and neatly trimmed gardens, now felt like the stage of an impending nightmare. A foe's presence was like a dark storm, palpable and oppressive. His henchmen flanked him, their menacing forms casting eerie silhouettes under the streetlights. The townsfolk, sensing the danger, hurriedly withdrew into their homes, peeking through curtains with fearful eyes. Windows shut with hurried clatters, and whispers of dread spread among the residents. They knew who walked their streets, and they knew better than to draw attention to themselves. A foe moved with purpose, his steps slow and deliberate, the ground seeming to tremble beneath his feet. He walked with an aura of arrogance, fully aware that no one in this town would dare oppose him. His henchmen followed closely, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of resistance, but finding none. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a dog quickly silenced by its owner. A foe's cold, malevolent gaze swept over the houses as they approached their target. The house at the end of the street stood quiet, its lights dimmed. This was where the boy was supposed to be hiding, the latest refuge of the one who held the power to challenge him. Without breaking stride, a foe turned to his lead henchman. "No one kills him, understood?" he ordered, his voice a low growl that promised swift retribution for any who dared to disobey. As they approached the door, a foe's instincts screamed a warning, and he leaped back just as a brilliant yellow beam of light struck the ground where he had been standing. From the roof, a tired, drawling voice said, "Missed." A foe and his henchmen looked up to see a man standing with casual ease. He looked about 20 years old, with short green hair and an outfit that combined formal elegance with heroic determination. He wore a bright green suit with white vertical stripes, a white shirt and red tie, and a white coat with blue epaulettes. The kanji for light was emblazoned on his shoulders, and he completed the look with polished black shoes and rectangular-shaped sunglasses. "If you're here for the quirk," the man said in a bored tone, "you're too late. The boy is long gone and out of your reach." A foe's eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. "So, you're the one they call Light Bright," he mocked. "The one who's been disrupting my operations around the world." The man raised a single eyebrow, his expression still one of disinterest. "Could be. That's what some people call me." He scratched the side of his head lazily as he spoke. A foe's henchmen were losing their patience. One of them, a burly figure with flames flickering around his fists, let out a growl. He raised his arm and sent a massive fireball hurtling towards the house. It struck with explosive force, engulfing the green-haired man in a fiery inferno. As the house erupted in flames with an arm flying out, the henchmen began to laugh, their cruel mirth filling the air. "So much for Light Bright," one of them jeered. Their laughter died abruptly as streams of light emerged from the smoke and flames. The man reformed atop a nearby power pole, his suit immaculate, not a single scratch on him. He stood there, illuminated by the setting sun, a beacon of defiance against the dark powers before him. The sight of the unscathed hero sent a ripple of unease through a foe's henchman. The man's calm, bored expression never wavered as he met a foe's gaze. "You'll have to try harder than that," he said in a bored tone, his voice carrying a quiet, lethal promise. A foe's expression darkened, a mix of frustration and intrigue. This Light Bright was no ordinary hero. He was a challenge, a puzzle to be solved, and a foe never backed down from a challenge. The tension in the air was palpable as the two forces stood off against each other. The peaceful suburban backdrop, a stark contrast to the impending clash of titans. The quiet town had become a battleground, and its fate now hung in the balance of this confrontation between light and darkness. A foe watched in silence as his henchmen continued their relentless assault. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small town, highlighting the chaos that had descended upon it. A thick haze of smoke and dust hung in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burning debris. The flame henchman, a burly figure with an aura of intense heat radiating from his body, growled in frustration. He sent a massive stream of fire towards Light Bright, the roaring inferno licking the air hungrily. Yet, as the flames engulfed him, Light Bright's body shimmered, transforming into pure light before reconstituting unharmed a moment later. Another henchman stepped forward, his face twisted in a snarl. He raised his hands, his index fingers aimed like guns, and began to shoot acid bullets. The deadly projectiles sliced through the air, leaving a sizzling trail. Each bullet that struck Light Bright passed through his body harmlessly, the impacted areas briefly turning into of light before reverting to their solid form. This futile exchange continued for several minutes. The henchmen grew more desperate, their attacks more frantic. They hurled every quirk at their disposal: blasts of ice, tendrils of shadow, razor-sharp winds, and even conventional firearms. But nothing seemed to work. Light Bright's form remained untouchable, each assault either passing through him or being absorbed and dissipated in a brilliant flash of light. A foe observed the scene with a detached curiosity, his cold eyes never leaving Light Bright. The villain's composure was unshaken, his interest piqued by the display of the hero's abilities. He watched as his henchmen, seasoned fighters and ruthless enforcers, became increasingly unhinged by their inability to land a blow. Light Bright, standing atop a power pole, seemed almost bored by the continuous barrage. His green hair fluttered slightly in the breeze, and his bright suit and coat remained pristine despite the onslaught. The rectangular sunglasses perched on his nose glinted in the sunlight, obscuring his eyes, but not his casual disdain for the henchman's efforts. With each failed attack, the tension in the air thickened. The henchman's frustration was palpable, their movements becoming more erratic. A particularly fierce barrage from the flame henchman ended with him panting heavily, sweat pouring down his face as he struggled to maintain his fiery onslaught. A foe finally raised a hand, signaling his men to cease their attacks. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the labored breathing of the henchman and the distant crackle of dying flames. Light Bright stood tall, untouched and unperturbed, his presence a beacon of defiance. "Well," a foe began, his voice calm and measured, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "It seems we have a stalemate." He stepped forward, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the ground. "You are quite the formidable opponent, Light Bright." Light Bright remained silent, his expression hidden behind his glasses. But there was a slight tilt to his head that suggested he was listening intently. A foe continued, his tone almost conversational. "You possess an intriguing quirk. The ability to convert your body into light makes you nearly invincible against physical attacks. But surely, there must be a limit to your power." Light Bright finally spoke, his voice carrying the same bored undertone. "Everyone has a limit, even you." He scratched the side of his head nonchalantly. "But I'm afraid you won't find mine today." A foe's lips curved into a thin, sinister smile. "We shall see about that." He turned to his henchman, a silent command in his eyes. The henchmen, though exhausted, prepared to launch another round of attacks, their determination to please their master overriding their fear of failure. They gathered their strength, quirks flaring to life once more. Light Bright's demeanor shifted subtly. His bored expression gave way to a flicker of determination. As the first henchman lunged forward, Light Bright moved with blinding speed. In an instant, he was behind the flame henchman, delivering a swift chop to the back of his neck. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the pavement. The other henchman hesitated, but only for a moment. Spurred on by a foe's presence, they resumed their attacks. Light Bright continued to move like a ghost, each strike precise and devastating. He ducked under a flurry of acid bullets, appearing beside the acid shooter and knocking him out with a single punch. A henchman with tendrils of shadow for arms lashed out, but Light Bright phased through the attack, reappearing behind him and delivering a sharp kick to his head. The shadow wielder dropped, his tendrils retracting as he lost consciousness. One by one, the henchmen fell. The man with ice powers tried to encase Light Bright in a freezing prison, but Light Bright's body dispersed into beams of light, reforming behind the ice wielder and taking him down with a swift strike. A foe watched, his expression unreadable, as Light Bright systematically dismantled his elite squad. The last henchman, desperate, pulled out a gun and fired wildly. The bullets passed harmlessly through Light Bright's body, and with a final burst of light, the henchman was disarmed and knocked out cold. Now, only a foe and Light Bright remained. The hero stood amidst the fallen henchman, his suit still immaculate, his expression still one of bored indifference. A foe's eyes narrowed, a mix of frustration and intrigue flickering across his face. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." Light Bright met a foe's gaze, unflinching. "Your move," he said, his voice steady. The town fell silent once more, the echoes of battle fading into the distance. A foe and Light Bright stood alone. The peaceful suburban backdrop, a stark contrast to the impending clash of titans. The quiet town had become a battleground, and its fate now hung in the balance of this confrontation between light and darkness. A foe stood tall, his dark silhouette dominating the scene. His cold eyes were fixed on the man standing in front of him. He began to speak, his voice carrying an ominous weight. "I know a great deal about you, Light Bright. You appeared out of the blue only a few years ago. Yet you've quickly made an impression as a persistent thorn in my side." A foe's tone was both patronizing and curious, his words chosen to probe and provoke. "Despite your efforts to help people, you don't strike me as the type who enjoys putting in the effort." Light Bright remained silent, his expression bored as ever, though he continued to scratch the side of his head lazily. A foe continued, his voice smooth and persuasive. "If you were to join me, you could live a life of luxury, doing whatever you wanted whenever you wanted. With your quirk, you could become a top officer in my order quickly. Think of it, no more running, no more hiding. Just power and comfort." The man listened without interrupting, his demeanor unchanging. When a foe finished, Light Bright med thoughtfully, still scratching his head. Finally, he began to speak, his voice as disinterested as his expression. "You know, that does sound nice. Laying around, doing nothing. Sounds like fun." For a moment, it seemed as if Light Bright might be considering the offer. But then, in a flash, his body dissolved into pure light, reforming a moment later on top of the power pole. His expression shifted subtly, a hint of seriousness replacing the usual boredom. He brought his hands together in a circle, light beginning to form between them. "Unfortunately," he said, his tone taking on a cold edge, "you killed my mom." The hero, his bright green, stood vigilant as light grew between his hands. His mind drifted back to a time long past, a memory that fueled his resolve and shaped his destiny. 13 years earlier, in a dimly lit office building, a young green-haired boy and his mother knelt on the cold, unforgiving floor. The air was thick with dread, the walls of the room seeming to close in around them. The soft hum of machinery was the only sound, a haunting reminder of the grim fate that awaited them. The mom's face was pale, her eyes wide with terror as she knelt directly in front of All for One. His presence was overpowering, an oppressive weight that seemed to drain the very air from the room. His large, calloused hand rested on her head, his fingers curling slightly as he examined her with a cold, calculating gaze. "Ah, a weak telekinesis quirk," a foe mused, his voice a deep, resonant murmur that sent chills down the woman's spine. "Hardly worth my time, but I suppose every little bit helps." Without warning, a foe's fingers tightened, and with a sickening crunch, he crushed her skull as if it were made of paper. Blood splattered in a macabre arc across the room, some of it landing on the young boy's face, warm and sticky. The woman's body crumpled to the floor, lifeless, her final breath a whisper lost to the void. The boy's scream tore through the air, raw and anguished. He struggled violently against the henchman holding him, his small body no match for the iron grip restraining him. Tears streamed down his cheeks, mingling with the blood as he reached out in vain for his mother. "Mom, Mom," he cried, his voice breaking. But the henchman's hold was unyielding. A foe turned his attention to Izuku, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his lips. He gestured for the boy to come forward. The henchman shoved Izuku, sending him sprawling beside Inko's corpse. The sight of her lifeless body so close, yet so far beyond his reach, filled the boy with a mix of grief and helpless rage. He was shaking like a leaf as a foe placed his massive hand atop his head. The contact was cold, and the power radiating from the villain was palpable. A foe shook him lightly, trying to coax a response from the terrified child. "How old are you?" a foe asked, his voice deceptively gentle. The boy's teeth chattered, and he could barely get the words out. I'm 7, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. A foe frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing. "If you were going to have a quirk, you'd have one by now," he said dismissively before shoving the boy onto his back. The boy landed with a thud, the breath knocked out of him. A foe's gaze shifted to a man standing in the corner, Hisashi, who was trembling uncontrollably. A foe gestured for him to step forward. Hisashi approached, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. "You brought in a weak quirk, Midoriya, but a quirk nonetheless," a foe said, his tone condescending. "You'll be paid, but not the amount we originally agreed upon." Hisashi nodded frantically, gratitude and fear etched into his features. A henchman handed him a small stack of cash, and Hisashi clutched it tightly before bolting from the room, eager to escape the oppressive aura of a foe. One of the henchmen turned to a foe. "What about her son, Izuku?" A foe waved a hand dismissively. "Throw him out. He's not worth killing." Izuku was dragged to his feet and roughly escorted out of the building. The henchman opened the door and tossed him out onto the street. He hit the pavement hard, scraping his palms and knees, the pain barely registering through the numbness of his grief. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual chaos of the dark era momentarily absent. Izuku lay there, his small body trembling, his mind a whirl of pain, fear, and loss. His mother's blood still smeared on his face. He felt the cold, uncaring world pressing down on him, a weight that seemed impossible to bear. He curled into a ball on the cold, hard ground, the reality of his situation crashing over him like a tidal wave. Alone, orphan, and powerless, Izuku's sobs echoed in the desolate street, a haunting testament to the cruelty of a world ruled by villains. Back in the present, Izuku's eyes refocused on the scene before him. The memory of that fateful day burned brightly in his mind, fueling his resolve. His mother's death had been the catalyst, transforming a frightened boy into a hero determined to bring justice to a world steeped in darkness. "Midori's sacred jewel," Izuku shouted, his voice ringing with uncharacteristic intensity. Beams of light shot out from the circle formed by his hands, twisting and turning through the air with deadly precision. They converged on a foe, who barely had time to react. The beams struck with incredible force, surrounding him in a halo of radiant energy. The explosion that followed was both brilliant and deafening. The beams of light erupted into a burst of raw power, engulfing a foe in a dazzling display. The ground shook with the impact, and a shock wave rippled outward, shattering windows and sending debris flying. As the light faded, the scene was one of devastation. The power pole where Izuku had stood was now a twisted wreck, and the surrounding area was scorched and blackened. A foe stood at the center of the blast zone, his form obscured by the lingering smoke and dust. Izuku reformed a short distance away, his expression returning to one of detached boredom. He watched the settling dust, waiting to see the outcome of his attack. The townsfolk, hidden in their homes, peeked out cautiously, drawn by the commotion and the hope that the threat had been vanquished. The silence that followed the explosion was heavy, the air thick with anticipation. Izuku's attack had been powerful, but he knew better than to underestimate a foe. He kept his guard up, ready for whatever might come next. As the smoke began to clear, a silhouette became visible through the haze. A foe, though visibly battered and scorched, remained standing. His clothes were singed, and his expression was one of cold fury. The attack had clearly taken its toll, but it had not been enough to bring him down. Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly behind his sunglasses. "Still standing, huh?" he muttered to himself, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. A foe stepped forward, his presence as imposing as ever despite his injuries. "Impressive," he said with a laugh, his voice rough but steady. But not enough. A thought surfaced in Izuku's mind. He turned his gaze towards a foe, the memory of his mother. Her final moments, and the sacrifices she made for him came rushing back, fueling a burning question he had harbored for years. "A foe, do you remember my mother?" A foe, still in the process of healing, turned his malevolent gaze towards Izuku. His eyes narrowed, trying to piece together the relevance of the question. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Yes," Izuku continued. His voice came out in a bored manner. "She had green hair and a telekinetic quirk. Do you remember her?" A foe's expression remained blank for a moment before he shrugged dismissively. "No," he said flatly. Izuku clenched his fists, the admission striking a deep chord of sorrow and anger within him. He had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed was a bitter pill to swallow. "I figured as much," he muttered, his voice tinged with sadness. "She was just another quirk for you to take, another life to destroy, huh?" A foe watched him with an impassive expression, his interest piqued by Izuku's unexpected vulnerability. "You know," Izuku continued in a slow manner, "I didn't awaken my quirk until I was 16. If I had manifested it earlier, you probably would have tried to take it from me when I was young. I was just a powerless kid, hiding in the shadows, protected by people who gave everything for me." A foe's eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. "And yet here you stand," he remarked, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "A boy who was once powerless, now daring to challenge me." Izuku's gaze hardened, his resolve solidifying. "And yet here I stand." A foe's expression darkened, the brief moment of amusement vanishing. "Then we shall see who stands victorious in the end," he growled, his dark aura surging once more. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The quiet town, once a serene backdrop, was now a war zone, its fate hanging in the balance of this epic confrontation. Izuku stood ready, his resolve steeled by the memory of his mother, and the determination to hold a foe's attention for as long as possible. A foe fixed his gaze on Izuku with a serious, almost disdainful look. "You think that quirk makes you my equal?" he sneered. Before Izuku could respond, a foe was upon him. In an instant, he closed the distance, his right arm taking on a black sheen that pulsed with ominous energy. With lightning speed, he drew his arm back and delivered a powerful punch to Izuku's gut. Izuku's eyes widened in shock, his face contorting with pain as the impact sent him flying. He smashed through several houses, the structures crumbling like sandcastles. His body bounced and tumbled across the ground for hundreds of meters, carving a deep trench of destruction. Dust and debris filled the air, a testament to the sheer force of a foe's blow. A foe landed gracefully, his smirk widening as he surveyed the chaos. "Quirk-nullifying quirks are hard to use in combat, but worth the slight pain," he mused aloud, flexing his arm as it returned to normal. His voice carried a chilling satisfaction as he began to walk towards Izuku's crumpled form. The town, once a peaceful suburb, was now a landscape of ruin. Shattered homes and scorched earth marked the path of Izuku's violent trajectory. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the acrid smell of destruction hanging heavy. Izuku lay on his back at the end of the trench, his bright green suit tattered and stained with dirt. He stared up at the sky, his mind swimming with pain, but his expression one of bored resignation. He coughed, wincing as he tried to catch his breath. "Oh," he muttered in a monotone voice, more annoyed than distressed. That hurt. Just as he attempted to sit up, a shadow loomed over him. A foe appeared, his imposing figure blotting out the sun. Without hesitation, a foe swung his fist down, once again coated in the black, quirk-nullifying sheen. The punch connected with Izuku's head with a bone-crunching force, driving him deeper into the ground. The impact sent shockwaves through the earth, causing the ground to crack and split open. Dust and debris erupted into the air, forming a dense, choking cloud. The sound of the blow echoed across the battlefield, a grim reminder of a foe's overwhelming power. Izuku's vision blurred, his head pounding from the brutal assault. He struggled to stay conscious, his thoughts a jumbled mix of pain and determination. Despite the agony coursing through his body, he knew he couldn't give up. The memory of his mother, the reason for his fight, flashed through his mind, strengthening his resolve. A foe stood over him, his cruel smile unwavering. Persistent, aren't you? He mocked, his voice a mix of condescension and grudging respect. The once serene town now lay in ruins, the quiet suburb transformed into a war zone. The landscape was a stark contrast between the overwhelming darkness of a foe and the faint, flickering light of Izuku's determination. Amidst the devastation, Izuku's spirit remained unbroken, his will to fight undiminished. A foe's laughter once again filled the air, a chilling reminder of the villain's dominance. But beneath the rubble and the dust, Izuku's resolve burned brighter than ever. The battle was far from over, and though the odds were stacked against him, he knew he couldn't surrender to the darkness. With a groan, Izuku tried to move, his body screaming in protest. He managed to lift his head, staring defiantly up at a foe. "You haven't won yet," he said, his voice sounding bored despite the pain. A foe's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from amusement to anger. "You are a fool to think you can defy me," he growled, raising his fist once more. Izuku braced himself, ready to face whatever came next. The fight for his mother's memory, for a world free from a foe's tyranny, was not over. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the battlefield, the stage was set for the next clash between light and darkness. Izuku transformed into light, just as a foe was about to strike him again. The relentless villain didn't let up, his fists coated in a quirk-nullifying black sheen that made every punch a devastating threat. Izuku barely had time to reform before a foe was upon him again, swinging his powerful fists with brutal precision. Each impact sent shockwaves through the ground, tearing apart the surroundings. The small town was becoming a wasteland of shattered buildings and upturned earth. Izuku knew he had to lead a foe away from the remaining civilians. With every fleeting moment he could create between a foe's attacks, he moved towards the nearby forest, drawing the fight away from the town's heart. Finally, they reached a small field on the outskirts. A foe landed with a thunderous punch, the ground splintering beneath his might. He looked up, his eyes scanning for Izuku, only to see multiple afterimages of the young hero forming a circle around him in the air. Each afterimage mirrored Izuku, hands coming together to form a glowing ball of light. In unison, they chanted, "Midori Sacred Jewel," and from each sphere, beams of concentrated light shot towards a foe. The convergence of light created a massive explosion, the brilliance of the attack illuminating the night and shaking the ground with its intensity. The afterimages dissipated as the real Izuku descended gracefully to the ground, placing his hands casually in his pockets. The smoke and dust from the explosion were still thick in the air when a foe burst forth, his eyes blazing with fury. But Izuku was ready. With swift precision, he raised his right leg, a ball of light forming on the sole of his foot. As a foe lunged closer, Izuku unleashed the beam from his foot, the searing light piercing through a foe's chest. The force of the attack sent the villain flying back, crashing into the ground with a thud. The gaping hole in his chest began to close almost immediately, healing with a sickening hiss. A foe lay on his back, momentarily stunned, as he heard Izuku's voice cutting through the chaos, eerily calm and bored. "You know, I've already won this fight," Izuku said, his tone flat and unruffled. "Even if you kill me here, I still win. That boy is safe, and one day that quirk will come back for you." The words struck a nerve. A foe's eyes began to glow with a malevolent red light, his fury palpable. The ground beneath them started to tremble, a deep, resonant rumble spreading through the area. The sheer force of his rage seemed to ripple through the air, causing trees to shake and the very earth to crack. The small field outside the town, once a serene spot, now felt like the epicenter of a brewing storm. The shadows cast by the moonlight danced wildly as the ground shook. Dust and debris floated in the air, adding to the surreal, nightmarish atmosphere. A foe pushed himself to his feet, his eyes glowing brighter, illuminating the darkness with their terrifying intensity. "You dare speak to me of victory," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent chills down Izuku's spine. "You are nothing but an insect, a momentary nuisance in my eternal reign." The landscape around them seemed to pulse with a foe's anger. The shaking intensified, cracks spider webbing across the ground, splitting trees, and toppling the remnants of nearby structures. The power emanating from a foe was overwhelming, a tangible force that pressed down on everything around him. Izuku stood his ground, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, ready for whatever a foe would throw at him next. Despite the chaos and the looming threat, he remained calm, his resolve unshaken. He had faced a foe's wrath before and survived. He would do so again. "You're wrong," Izuku replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil around them. "I may be just one person, but I'm not alone. The hope and strength of everyone you've oppressed will always stand against you." That was a lot to say all once. A foe's fury reached a boiling point, his glowing eyes narrowing with rage. The air crackled with energy as he prepared to launch another attack, his power surging to new heights. The ground beneath his feet buckled and split, the earth itself seeming to recoil from his presence. The stage was set for their final confrontation. The once quiet field was now a battleground, the fate of countless lives hanging in the balance. Izuku really wanted to have a nap, but he was ready to face the darkness head-on. The memory of his mother, the promise he had made to protect the innocent, and the determination to help end a foe's reign of terror fueled his every move. Izuku's body started to glow brightly, an incandescent aura that illuminated the darkened battlefield. His eyes blazed with determination as he faced All for One, the arch-nemesis whose reign of terror had cast a long shadow over the world. Dark wisps of malevolent energy began to swirl around a foe, coalescing until his entire form was shrouded in an impenetrable darkness. A foe leaped forward, his dark cloak trailing like an ominous specter. In response, Izuku summoned all his strength, creating balls of intense light around each of his fists. The radiant orbs hummed with raw energy as he brought his hands together, the light intensifying to almost blinding levels. He pulled them apart slowly, forming a powerful sword of pure light, its edges shimmering with potent energy. Just before he launched himself at a foe, Izuku's watch vibrated softly. He glanced down and saw a message flash across the small screen. "He's safe." Relief and joy flickered across his face, breaking through his intense focus for a brief moment. He allowed himself a small smile, the knowledge that the boy they were protecting was out of harm's way fueling his resolve. With renewed determination, Izuku jumped forward, the sword of light blazing as he aimed it at a foe. The two forces, light and darkness, collided with explosive force. The impact created a massive shockwave, the ground beneath them buckling and shattering from the sheer power of their clash. Trees were uprooted, and debris flew through the air as the energy of their struggle reverberated through the surroundings. A foe met Izuku's attack head-on, his dark energy wrapping around the sword of light, trying to extinguish its brilliance. The ground beneath their feet cracked and split, sending jagged fissures radiating outward. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the acrid scent of burning earth. The sheer force of their confrontation created a blinding flash, and for a moment, it was impossible to distinguish light from dark. The power struggle intensified, each combatant pouring every ounce of their strength into the fight. Izuku's sword of light pulsed with energy, while a foe's dark aura grew denser, more oppressive. The ground beneath them crumbled further, a testament to the destructive power being unleashed. Their faces, lit by the fierce glow of their powers, were masks of concentration and unyielding will. As the clash reached its zenith, a massive shockwave erupted from the epicenter of their struggle. The force of the explosion sent both Izuku and a foe flying in opposite directions, hurtling them miles away from each other. The shockwave rippled outward, leveling everything in its path, reducing trees to splinters and buildings to rubble. Dust and debris filled the air, creating a choking cloud that obscured the battlefield. Izuku's body landed in multiple pieces, scattered across a devastated landscape. His consciousness flickered as he felt the familiar pain of his body needing to reform. Groaning, he muttered to himself, "I really need a vacation." Slowly, his scattered pieces began to glow and pull together, reassembling into his form. He stood up, leaning heavily on a nearby tree to steady himself. His light had dimmed, but it was not extinguished. With a deep breath, he started walking away, each step fueled by the knowledge of their small victory. Miles away, a foe landed hard, his dark aura flickering with the strain of the battle. He remained down for several minutes, allowing his body to heal. His wounds closed slowly, the pain a reminder of the fierce opponent he had just faced. He couldn't allow his rage to cloud his judgment. He needed clarity to find the boy all over again. His cold eyes scanned the horizon, calculating his next move. The landscape around them bore the scars of their titanic clash. The once serene forest was now a wasteland of splintered trees and churned earth. The air was thick with dust, the setting sun casting long shadows through the haze. Izuku continued to move forward, his thoughts a whirlwind of exhaustion and resolve. The message on his watch replayed in his mind. He's safe. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Despite the pain and destruction, their efforts had not been in vain. The boy they had sworn to protect was safe, for now. As a foe rose to his feet, his dark form silhouetted against the twilight sky, he suppressed his fury. Rage would not help him now. He needed to be methodical. The boy with One for All had eluded him once again, but a foe was nothing if not relentless. He would find him, and when he did, he would ensure that no force of light could ever stand against his darkness. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Izuku and a foe, separated by miles, both knew that their paths would cross again. The future of the world still hung in the balance, and both light and dark were preparing for the next inevitable clash. As Izuku walked away, leaning on the tree for support, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that as long as there was hope, there was a reason to keep fighting. Inko and Hisashi Midoriya were in the hospital, eagerly anticipating the arrival of their first child. The sterile white walls of the delivery room were a stark contrast to the warmth and love that filled the couple's hearts. Inko lay on the bed, her face contorted in pain and effort, while Hisashi stood beside her, his hand clasping hers firmly, offering silent encouragement. The delivery was arduous, stretching over several hours. Inko's breaths came in ragged gasps, each push sapping her strength. Her husband's reassuring grip was her anchor, his eyes never leaving hers, filled with unwavering support. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a sharp cry broke the tension. Relief washed over Inko as the doctor held up their newborn son, a tiny bundle of life with tufts of green hair, mirroring his mother's. As the baby drew his first breath, a peculiar chill settled over the room. The temperature plummeted sharply, unnoticed in the initial moments of joy and exhaustion. Hisashi, still holding Inko's hand, felt the cold bite through his clothes, a stark contrast to the warmth of the moment. He frowned, looking around, but before he could voice his concern, the baby let out a wail. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Frost rapidly crept across the room, spreading from the newborn like wildfire. The wall, the floor, the equipment, everything was engulfed in a thick layer of ice. The doctor, still holding the baby, froze in place, his expression of concern immortalized in a crystalline sheen. Inko and Hisashi, their hands still clasped, were encased in ice, their faces etched with a mixture of wonder and fear. The ice continued to spread, growing thicker and colder by the second. The heart monitors, the lights, even the very air seemed to crackle and freeze. The doctor, the nurses, and the Midoriyas were all trapped in this sudden, lethal winter, their last expressions frozen in time. The alarm in the hospital blared, a shrill sound that cut through the sudden silence. Nurses and doctors rushed to the room, their hurried footsteps echoing in the corridors. They skidded to a halt at the door, eyes widening in horror at the sight before them. The entire room was a frozen tableau, glistening eerily under the harsh fluorescent lights. The scene was surreal life captured in a moment of stillness, with the baby's cry still echoing in the icy air. Inside the frozen room, the baby's wails subsided into soft whimpers, his breath visible in the cold air. The ice around him shimmered, responding to his cries. His tiny hands clenched and unclenched, the only signs of life in the otherwise motionless scene. Outside, the hospital staff scrambled for a solution. Specialists were called, quirk experts summoned, and the building was evacuated. The phenomenon defied explanation. An infant with such a powerful quirk was unheard of. The challenge was not just understanding it, but containing it without harming the newborn. Hours passed before a resolution was found. A hero with a heat-based quirk was brought in, cautiously applying his powers to thaw the room. The process was slow, methodical, ensuring the safety of the baby. As the ice melted, the room returned to its previous state, albeit now filled with puddles of water and lifeless bodies encased in ice. Inko and Hisashi were beyond saving, their bodies stiff and cold, their faces forever etched with the final emotions they felt. The doctor, released next, had died instantly, the cold too intense for any last thoughts. The baby, however, was alive. He was carefully extracted from the frozen grip of the doctor, wrapped in a warm blanket, and handed over to a specialist. The hospital was filled with a somber silence, the weight of the tragedy hanging heavily in the air. He's special, the specialist whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and sorrow. The infant, now calm, looked up at the new faces around him with wide, innocent eyes, unaware of the devastation he had caused. His breath still visible in the cold air, he nestled into the warmth of the blanket, his quirk temporarily subdued. The baby was moved to a specialized ward, equipped to handle quirks of all magnitudes. In the days that followed, tests were run, and experts consulted, but the phenomenon of his quirk remained a marvel. It was determined that he could manipulate ice, a power both beautiful and formidable, one that had already altered the lives of many. A couple of days following the incident, a sleek black car pulled up to the entrance of the hospital. Its windows were tinted, and the body gleamed under the morning sun, an embodiment of authority and purpose. From the vehicle stepped a woman wearing a tailored suit and skirt, her demeanor exuding confidence and control. She was followed by two men, equally sharp in their dark suits, their expressions unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. The trio walked with deliberate steps towards the hospital entrance, a path clearing ahead of them, as if the very air parted to make way for their advance. They reached the front desk, where the woman produced a badge, flashing it with practiced ease. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the Hero Commission insignia before nodding and directing them towards the elevators. They walked until they were inside an office lined with medical degrees and hero memorabilia. A quirk specialist awaited them. The woman took a seat across from him, her guard standing silently behind her. their presence a quiet but undeniable assertion of authority. "Thank you for contacting us," the woman said, her voice smooth and professional. "We understand the gravity of the situation and are here to take the child." The specialist nodded, his face lined with concern. "Given the nature of his quirk and the tragic incident, we agree that this is the best course of action for Japan. His abilities, once controlled, could be an invaluable asset to our heroes." One of the men in suits stepped forward, placing a sleek black briefcase on the table between them. He clicked it open with a practiced hand, revealing neatly stacked bundles of cash. The specialist's eyes widened slightly, though he quickly masked his reaction. The woman's expression softened slightly, a rare glimpse of something almost maternal. "Indeed. We will ensure he receives the training and care necessary. For now, it is best that the world believes he did not survive. It will prevent any undue attention and allow us to proceed without interference." The specialist sighed, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. His eyes flickered to the briefcase before meeting the woman's gaze. "I understand. I will make the necessary arrangements to announce that the boy died in the incident." With a nod, the woman rose, signaling the end of the meeting. "Thank you for your cooperation. You are doing the right thing for the greater good." She gestured subtly, and the briefcase was left behind as they exited the room. A few weeks passed, and word of the incident spread through the community like wildfire. The hospital staff and those close to the Midoriya family were devastated. Funerals were arranged for those who had perished in that fateful room, a somber cloud hanging over the preparations. Mitsuki and her husband, Masaru, were particularly grief-stricken. They had been close friends of the Midoriyas, their families often spending time together, sharing dreams and worries about their children's futures. The news hit them like a sledgehammer. The loss of their dear friends and the tragic fate of their newborn son almost too much to bear, they said. "They said the child was too weak to survive his own quirk," Mitsuki whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face, mirrored by Masaru's silent grief. The service was held in a serene cemetery, the day marked by a gentle breeze that rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of fresh flowers. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects, their hearts heavy with sorrow. The ceremony was beautiful and respectful, a fitting tribute to the Midoriya family. A single, elegant headstone was placed, bearing the names of Enko, Hisashi, and little Izuku Midoriya. It stood as a poignant reminder of the family now lost, a focal point for the collective grief and remembrance of those who had known and loved them. As the service concluded, Mitsuki stood by the headstone, her hand resting on the cool granite. "Enko, Hisashi, little Izuku, I promise we'll remember you. We'll make sure your memory lives on." Masaru joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We owe them that much, and we must believe that wherever they are at peace." In the shadows of the cemetery, the woman from the Hero Commission watched the proceedings with a stoic expression. Her eyes flicked to the headstone before she turned and walked away. The knowledge of the true fate of Izuku Midoriya, a closely guarded secret within the commission. Back at the Hero Commission headquarters, the infant Izuku was being cared for in a specially designed nursery. His icy quirk, a force of nature even at such a young age, was monitored and controlled within the secure confines of the facility. The woman, now back in her office, watched through a one-way mirror as the child lay peacefully, unaware of the world outside. "He will be a great asset," she murmured to herself, determination hardening her features. "And we will ensure he becomes the hero Japan needs." The future of Izuku Midoriya, now shrouded in secrecy and potential, lay ahead, shaped by the hands of the Hero Commission. The world would believe he was gone, but in the heart of the organization, he was being prepared for a destiny that no one could yet foresee. A few years had passed since the fateful day of Izuku's birth, and now at 6 years old, Izuku Midoriya had known no other life than the cold, sterile confines of the Hero Commission's buildings. His world was a series of training rooms, observation chambers, and the endless white corridors that connected them. The memory of his parents was but a distant, almost forgotten whisper in the back of his mind, replaced by the ever-present demands of the Commission. Izuku's quirk, a powerful ability to manipulate ice, had proven difficult to control. Accidents were frequent, and the young boy often found himself at the center of unintentional chaos. Staff members he accidentally froze would disappear soon after, and he was left to wonder if they were okay or if he had caused them harm. His handler, Sakura, was a stern woman who maintained a cold professionalism in their interactions. She was not cruel, but there was no warmth in her demeanor, no comfort in her words. Early on, Sakura explained Izuku's purpose to him in blunt terms. "You will become a hero, Izuku. You will bring justice to those who break society's rules. That is your destiny." To instill this sense of justice, another agent named Shikamaru was assigned to take Izuku on field trips outside the Commission's walls. Shikamaru's quirk, Shadow Warp, allowed them to move unseen, observing the darker corners of society. Izuku, with wide, innocent eyes, witnessed acts of villainy that turned his stomach and made his small hands clench in fear and anger. What he didn't know was that these incidents were staged by the Commission to shape his understanding of good and evil. On one such outing, Shikamaru and Izuku stood hidden in the shadows of an alleyway, watching a man threaten a family with a knife. The villain's voice was cruel, his intentions clear. Shikamaru's hand rested lightly on Izuku's shoulder, a silent command to observe and learn. "Don't interfere," Shikamaru whispered, his voice a low, steady hum. "Understand the evil so you know what you must fight." But this time was different. This was the third act of villainy they had witnessed in a row, and Izuku's young heart could no longer bear the sight of innocent people in danger. His anger boiled over, and without thinking, he extended his hand. A wave of ice shot out, snaking along the ground until it reached the villain. The ice climbed up the man's legs, encasing him completely. The villain stood frozen for a moment, his eyes wide with shock and fear, before the ice began to crack and, with a shattering sound, broke him into tiny pieces. Izuku gasped, his green eyes wide with horror at what he had done. Shikamaru acted quickly, grabbing the boy and using his Shadow Warp quirk to transport them back to the Commission. They reappeared in a dimly lit room, the air thick with tension. Izuku was trembling, his small body racked with sobs. Sakura was waiting for them, her face an unreadable mask. Shikamaru gave a brief nod, a silent exchange of satisfaction passing between the agents. "He acted," Shikamaru said simply. Sakura knelt before Izuku, her eyes cold, but her voice attempting to soothe. "Izuku, what you did was necessary. The world is full of people who will harm others without a second thought. You have the power to stop them." "But he shattered," Izuku stammered, his voice choked with tears. "Yes," Sakura replied, her tone unwavering. "And because of that, he can never hurt anyone again. You must understand, Izuku, your power is a gift to protect those who cannot protect themselves." From that day forward, Izuku's training intensified. Every day he was pushed to the limits of his quirk, learning to harness and control the immense power within him. He practiced freezing objects, controlling the spread of ice, and using it in combat scenarios. The training was grueling, and often Izuku would collapse in exhaustion, only to be urged to his feet again. His interactions with others were minimal, his life a solitary existence defined by duty and expectation. He grew quieter, more introspective, his thoughts often returning to the frozen alleyway and the shattered remains of the villain. The image haunted him, a reminder of the destructive potential of his quirk. Yet, despite the harshness of his training and the coldness of his handlers, a small spark of hope remained in Izuku's heart. He dreamed of becoming a hero not out of fear or duty, but because he wanted to protect people. He wanted to bring warmth to a world that had shown him so much coldness. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Izuku sat alone in his small room, looking out of the window at the stars. The sky was clear, a canvas of endless possibilities. He clenched his fist, a resolute look in his eyes. "I will become a hero," he whispered to himself, a promise that echoed in the silence of his room. "I will protect people, and I will do it my way." Izuku Midoriya, with the power of ice flowing through his veins and a heart full of determination, was on a path set by others, but driven by his own sense of justice and compassion. The world outside might be cold and harsh, but within him burned a desire to make it a better place, one frozen villain at a time. A few more years passed, and Izuku Midoriya was now 12 years old. The once innocent and frightened boy had become numb to the violence and death that surrounded him. He followed orders and complied with directions, but any sense of urgency had long since faded. His speech was slow and drawn out, mirroring the lethargy that had seeped into his very being. The Hero Commission had recognized his immense potential and began pitting him against opponents with strong quirks. They brought him into sealed-off arenas where he faced all manner of adversaries. An older man with wings, a girl who could turn her arm into a gun, and other formidable foes. Izuku defeated them all with minimal effort, his quirk so powerful that he barely needed to exert himself. One day, however, everything changed. Izuku found himself transported to a small deserted island, the arena in the center surrounded by a vast expanse of forest and grass. The air was thick with a scent of the sea, the gentle rustle of leaves providing a deceptive tranquility. Izuku lay on his side, waiting for his opponent with the same detached boredom he felt for every other fight. His opponent emerged from the forest, her presence immediately noticeable as waves of heat radiated from her body. She was a girl around his age, with fiery red hair and a determined expression. Izuku's eyes gained a spark of interest as he stood up, his posture lazy yet somehow ready for action. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," he drawled, offering his name out of habit rather than politeness. "I don't care. I just want to fight," the girl replied coldly, her body glowing with an intense heat. Lava dripped from her hands, sizzling as it hit the ground. Without warning, she launched the first attack. A torrent of molten lava shot towards Izuku, turning the ground into a molten landscape. Izuku responded instinctively, his body shimmering before transforming into solid ice. He moved with surprising agility, a wave of ice surging from his hands, meeting the lava in a violent hiss of steam. The clash created a cloud of mist, obscuring their vision for a moment. Izuku moved slowly, his actions almost lethargic as he dodged her attacks with minimal effort. He sent out tendrils of ice, attempting to encase her, but she melted them effortlessly. The ground beneath them became a battlefield of contrasting elements, patches of ice meeting pools of molten rock. The girl moved with precision, her attacks relentless. She sent a stream of lava towards Izuku, forcing him to leap back and create an ice barrier. The heat was intense, but Izuku remained unfazed, his expression calm and focused. He countered with a barrage of ice shards, aiming to overwhelm her, but she deflected them with ease, her body glowing brighter. As the fight progressed, it became clear that they were evenly matched. Izuku's ice clashed against her lava, creating a spectacle of steam and light. The island bore the scars of their battle, the once tranquil landscape, now a chaotic mixture of frozen and molten terrain. Izuku felt a rare sense of exhilaration. The girl's ferocity and determination were a stark contrast to the lifeless opponents he had faced before. She fought with a purpose that resonated with him, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Suddenly, the girl surged forward, her body transforming into a torrent of lava. Izuku barely had time to react as she closed the distance, her hand blazing with molten heat. She struck out, and Izuku raised an ice shield, but her attack was too powerful. The shield shattered, and he felt searing pain as her lava blade sliced through his arm. Izuku gritted his teeth, the pain sharpening his focus. He stepped back, his entire body shimmering before transforming into ice. He regenerated his arm with a concentrated burst of cold, the new limb glistening in the sunlight. The girl watched with a hint of surprise, but her resolve didn't waver. "You're strong," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But not strong enough." Izuku's response was a slow, determined smile. "We'll see about that." He launched himself at her, his body shifting between ice and flesh as he moved. The ground froze beneath his feet, creating a slick path that allowed him to slide with incredible speed. He closed the distance between them in an instant, his hand outstretched as he aimed to freeze her in place. The girl reacted with equal swiftness, her body erupting into a column of lava that incinerated everything in its path. The two forces collided, sending shockwaves through the island. Trees were uprooted, and the ground split apart as the battle intensified. Izuku and the girl fought with a ferocity that seemed to defy their age. Each attack was met with a counter, each strategy with a rebuttal. The island transformed into a battlefield of ice and fire, the once serene landscape now a testament to their power. The sky was filled with steam and smoke, a cacophony of sizzling and cracking filling the air. Izuku's eyes glinted with a rare intensity. He had never been pushed this far before, and the challenge ignited something within him. He formed massive ice constructs, sending them crashing towards the girl. She responded with waves of lava, melting through the ice and turning the ground into a churning sea of molten rock. The fight dragged on, neither combatant willing to give an inch. Hours passed, and the landscape continued to bear the brunt of their powers. Izuku's stamina was incredible, his ice quirk allowing him to regenerate and sustain himself. The girl's lava quirk was equally impressive, her control over the molten element absolute. As night began to fall, the island was a stark contrast of frozen tundra and burning hellscape. The battle reached its climax as the girl unleashed a powerful surge of lava, engulfing Izuku in a tidal wave of molten fury. Izuku responded with a burst of ice that froze the wave mid-air, creating a breathtaking sculpture of ice and fire. In a final, desperate move, the girl shot her lava fists into the air. They grew as they ascended, becoming massive molten giants that rained down upon the island. The ground shook as the lava fists pummeled the landscape, turning it into a molten inferno. Izuku, undeterred, created ice fists from the ground up all over the island to match her attack. The ice fists rose, meeting the lava fists in midair. The resulting collision sent shockwaves through the island, the impact so powerful that it reshaped the entire landscape. The once serene island was now a battlefield of ice and fire, scorched earth mingling with frozen tundra. As the final lava fist descended, Izuku mustered all his strength to create a massive ice fist to counter it. The two forces met with a deafening roar, the ground trembling under the force of their clash. The heat from the lava was unbearable, and Izuku felt one of his legs getting destroyed from intense pressure. When the dust settled, the island was a scene of devastation. The ground was scorched and frozen in equal measure, a stark reminder of the fierce battle that had taken place. Izuku lay on the ground, his body exhausted and his leg below his knee was gone. The wound was cauterized by the intense heat, leaving a charred stump where his leg had been. The girl stood over him, her expression triumphant yet cold, breathing heavily as blood ran down the side of her face. She reached down and picked him up with surprising gentleness, recognizing the resilience and strength he had shown. At that moment, Shikamaru appeared, his shadow quirk enveloping them both. "It's time to go," he said, his voice calm and measured. The girl nodded, still holding Izuku as they were warped away from the island, leaving behind the battlefield that bore witness to their incredible powers. Izuku's eyes fluttered open as they reappeared in the Hero Commission's facility. He was too tired to move, his body aching from the intense battle. The cold, sterile room was silent, except for the faint hum of the medical equipment. His mind, however, was far from quiet. Thoughts swirled like a storm, centering on the girl he had fought. She was fierce, relentless, and powerful, much like him. But there was something different about her, something that gnawed at his thoughts. She seemed to relish the fight, embracing the Hero Commission's version of justice with a fervor that Izuku found unsettling. As he replayed the battle in his mind, he recalled the cold, almost triumphant look in her eyes. She didn't just fight because she was told to. She fought because she wanted to, because she believed in the justice she was delivering. Izuku shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in his leg, or rather, the absence of it. The wound was cauterized, a grim reminder of the battle's intensity. He could use ice to replace it, but it will be a pain. He stared at the ceiling, his mind drifting to the concept of justice. What did it truly mean? Was it simply following orders, doing what the Hero Commission deemed right? Or was there something more to it? He had been told since he was young that he would bring justice to those who broke society's rules. But now, as he thought about the girl and the life she seemed to embrace, he couldn't help but question it. Was justice just a tool, a weapon to be wielded without question? Or was it a deeper, more profound principle? Izuku's thoughts were a tangled web of confusion and doubt. The girl had shown him a different side of justice, one that was brutal and unyielding. But was that truly what he wanted to embody? As he lay there, he made a silent vow to himself. He would find his own understanding of justice, one that aligned with his heart, and not just the Commission's cold directives. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Izuku Midoriya would forge his own way, discovering the true meaning of justice on his terms. A few years later, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a gang of about 20 people were laughing and celebrating their newest catch. The dimly lit room was filled with the clinking of bottles and raucous laughter, a stark contrast to the terrified silence of the three young women chained to the floor. Huddled in fear, their eyes darted around, looking for any chance of escape. Each of them possessed a mutant quirk. One had the features of a bird, another of a fox, and the third bore the traits of a dog. The gang members were well into their alcohol, discussing the significant profit they would make from selling the women. They boasted loudly, their voices echoing off the warehouse walls. But amid their revelry, the room began to grow noticeably colder. A small, icy mist started to form, creeping along the floor and swirling around their ankles. The gang members were slow to catch on, too engrossed in their celebrations. However, the women noticed immediately. Their breaths came out in visible puffs, and ice crystals began to form along the floor. Thin spikes of ice suddenly shot up with precise accuracy, shattering the chains that bound them. The women shook in surprise, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. One of them, the fox mutant, quickly gathered her wits and began pushing the others towards the exit. "Run," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with urgency. As the women scrambled for the door, the gang members finally noticed the change. They reached for their weapons, but it was too late. The ice on the floor surged up, encasing their feet in solid blocks, immobilizing them. A few managed to pull out their guns, their hands shaking as they tried to aim. Before they could fire, the icy mist thickened and enveloped them. In an instant, the guns were encased in ice, the bullets frozen in the chambers. The gang members looked at each other in confusion and fear as the temperature continued to plummet. Outside, the women burst through the door, gasping for air. Hero Commission agents and EMS personnel were waiting, their expressions a mix of relief and readiness. The women were quickly ushered to safety, blankets wrapped around their shivering forms. Back inside, the entire room was rapidly becoming an icy prison. The gang members raged and struggled, but their efforts were futile against the relentless advance of the ice. The temperature dropped further, and an eerie silence fell over the warehouse, broken only by the faint sound of crackling ice. Out of the mist, Izuku Midoriya slowly melded from the wall in his ice form, his red eyes glowing ominously in the dim light. His presence was both ethereal and terrifying, a harbinger of cold justice. The gang members' faces twisted in fear as they recognized the figure before them. Desperation filled the room as they tried to free themselves, but the ice held firm. Izuku transitioned from his ice form, revealing his true appearance. He wore a long, dark blue coat with a plush white fur collar that added a touch of elegance and authority to his presence. Underneath the coat, a crisp white shirt, sleek black pants, and polished black boots gave him a rugged, formidable look. Topping off the ensemble, Izuku donned a wide-brimmed hat and circular tinted glasses, which added a layer of mystery and intellect to his appearance. Izuku surveyed the scene with a calm, almost detached demeanor. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his boots crunching on the icy floor. The gang members' breaths came in ragged gasps, the cold biting through their clothes and skin. Izuku stopped in front of the first gang member, his eyes piercing through the tinted glasses. "Why do you do this?" he asked slowly, his voice a low, icy drawl. The man stammered, his lips turning blue from the cold. I don't." Izuku shook his head slowly. "It doesn't matter, I guess," he said, raising his hand. A sharp spike of ice shot up, impaling the man through the chest. The life drained from his eyes, and he slumped, encased in a frozen tomb. The remaining gang members screamed, their panic rising. Izuku moved methodically from one to the next, each step measured and deliberate. "Do you think you're above the law?" he asked the next, his voice calm and unhurried. The man whimpered, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Please, don't kill me. I have a family." Izuku's expression remained impassive. "It will be over soon," he stated, and another ice spike erupted from the ground, silencing the man's pleas forever. One by one, Izuku questioned each gang member, his tone never changing. "What makes you think you can take lives for profit? Do you believe in consequences? What do you know of justice?" Each question was met with a mix of terror and incoherent babbling, and each time, Izuku's answer was the same: "It doesn't matter." As he moved through the room, the icy mist thickened, encasing the walls and ceiling in a glittering, frozen sheen. The once celebratory atmosphere was now a frigid tomb, the laughter replaced by the screams and cries of the dying. Izuku's final target was the gang leader, a burly man with a tattooed face. He had managed to avoid Izuku's wrath until now, but there was no escape from the icy justice that was closing in. Izuku approached him, his eyes glowing with a cold, unyielding light. "Do you feel powerful, exploiting the weak?" Izuku asked, his voice a mere whisper. The gang leader spat, defiance in his eyes, even as the cold sapped his strength. "You're no better than us," he sneered. "You're just a killer." Izuku paused, considering the words. "Perhaps," he said slowly. "But my killings are not for profit or pleasure. They are for justice." With that, he raised his hand one last time. The ice surged, enveloping the gang leader in a solid block, his defiance frozen in place. The warehouse was silent once more, the air still and cold. Izuku stood amidst the frozen bodies, his expression unreadable. He had done what was necessary, what the Hero Commission had trained him to do. But as he looked at the lifeless forms around him, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Was this truly justice? As he turned to leave, the ice retreated, leaving behind a frozen wasteland. The warehouse doors swung open, and the Hero Commission agents entered, their faces set with grim determination. They moved quickly, securing the scene and ensuring the women were safe. Izuku stepped out into the night, the chill of his power still lingering in the air. The vehicle awaited him, and he climbed in, the door closing with a soft thud. As they drove away, Izuku's thoughts drifted to the concept of justice. What did it truly mean? Was it simply following orders, doing what the Hero Commission deemed right? Or was there something more to it? The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Izuku Midoriya would continue to serve as the cold, unyielding force the world needed. For in his heart, he knew that true justice was not about warmth or comfort. It was about doing what was necessary to protect the innocent and uphold the law. As the vehicle sped through the city streets, the lights of the buildings casting long shadows, Izuku resolved to find his own understanding of justice. The path was fraught with moral complexities, but he was determined to see it through. For the sake of those he had saved, and for the memory of those he had lost, Izuku Midoriya would be the hero the world needed, no matter the cost. When Izuku was 18, he finally learned the truth about his past. For years, Izuku had been groomed and trained by the Hero Commission, serving their vision of justice without question. But despite his rigorous training and relentless conditioning, there was always a nagging doubt at the back of his mind, an itch that refused to go away. He had never questioned how he had come to be with the Commission, accepting their story that his parents had died, and they had taken him in. It seemed pointless to dwell on it after all. He was alive and had a purpose. Yet, sometimes, late at night, the question would arise. Had the Commission played a role in his parents' deaths? He searched through records and databases, finding little information about his birth or his parents. Persistence paid off when he eventually stumbled upon a name, a quirk specialist who had been involved in his early years. The man was older now, living a quiet life in a comfortable apartment, far removed from the world of heroes and villains. The specialist was sitting in his living room, the glow of the television casting soft shadows on the walls. The room was warm, cozy even, filled with the mundane clutter of everyday life. He sat back in his chair, engrossed in the evening news, when suddenly the temperature began to drop. The lights flickered, and a cold mist crept into the room, swirling around his feet. The man took a few deep breaths of the cold air, his breath visible in the chill. He reached for the remote, muting the television, and settled back into his chair, a resigned look on his face. "It's about time you found me," he said calmly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Behind him, a misty form materialized, red eyes glowing ominously in the dim light. Izuku's presence filled the room, his cold aura seeping into every corner. In a slow, soft voice, he spoke, "Tell me." It was less of a command and more of a request, carrying an underlying tone of sorrow and determination. The man in the chair sighed, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Should I? It won't matter either way," he replied calmly. "If you're here, you know enough, don't you? Will it change anything for you? It won't help you to know." Izuku's misty form seemed to pause, as if deep in thought. "Why?" he asked, his voice tinged with a hint of pain and confusion. The man took a moment, considering his words carefully before sighing deeply. "Your first cry killed your parents and the staff in the room. Instead of sending you to your godparent Mitsuki, I sold you to the Hero Commission while proclaiming you were killed with your parents." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The man's words hung in the air, a cold, brutal truth that cut deeper than any blade. Finally, the man turned his head slightly, meeting Izuku's red eyes with a tired gaze. "Does that make you feel any better, kid?" Izuku's eyes softened slightly, the pain in his expression almost imperceptible. "No," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The man felt a wave of drowsiness wash over him, the cold sapping his energy. He knew what was coming and accepted it with a weary sigh. "I get it. I trust you won't go after my family," he murmured, his voice growing weaker. "Midoriya." With that final word, the man's head slumped forward, and his breathing slowed to a stop. The room grew even colder as Izuku's misty form solidified into his physical self. He stood over the lifeless body, his face a mask of stoic resolve, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil within. Izuku remained there for a long time, the silence of the room pressing down on him. He thought about the man's words, the implications of his actions, and the weight of the truth he had uncovered. He had always known his role was to maintain order, to uphold the Commission's vision of justice. But now he realized just how deep the manipulation went. As he turned to leave, Izuku cast one last glance at the man who had played a part in shaping his fate. "Rest in peace," he muttered, more to himself than to the deceased. He stepped out into the night, the cold air wrapping around him like a shroud. The drive back to the Commission headquarters was silent, the streets empty and dark. Izuku's mind raced with thoughts and questions, his heart heavy with the burden of his newfound knowledge. What was justice? Was it simply following orders, doing what the Hero Commission deemed right? Or was there something more to it? Upon arriving at headquarters, Izuku made his way to his quarters, the cold still clinging to him. He sat down, his thoughts returning to the conversation with the specialist. The man's words echoed in his mind, challenging his beliefs and forcing him to reconsider his path. A few days later, Izuku Midoriya stood silently before a grave, a bouquet of white lilies cradled in his gloved hands. The cold wind whispered through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees and carrying with it the scent of fresh earth. His long, dark blue coat with its plush white fur collar fluttered gently in the breeze, adding a touch of somber elegance to the already solemn atmosphere. Underneath the coat, a crisp white shirt, sleek black pants, and polished black boots completed his imposing figure. Topping off his ensemble, a wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, while circular tinted glasses hid his eyes, adding an air of mystery to his presence. Izuku stared at the headstone, his mind a storm of emotions and thoughts. The inscription on the granite was simple, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime. Inko Midoriya, Hisashi Midoriya, and Izuku Midoriya beloved family. He had never known his parents, their memories lost to him in the fog of his early years with the Hero Commission. But now, standing before their grave, he felt the heavy burden of their absence, the weight of what he had lost, and what he had never truly known. He had come to this place seeking answers, hoping that perhaps the stillness and solemnity of the grave would offer him some clarity. But now, standing there with a bouquet in his hands, he wasn't sure what, if anything, he should say. The wind picked up, swirling around him, and the cold, familiar mist of his quirk began to form at his feet, a reflexive response to his inner turmoil. Izuku was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't hear Mitsuki arrive until she was right beside him. She was an older woman, her blonde hair streaked with silver, but she radiated the warmth and strength of someone far younger. She carried herself with the grace and dignity of someone who had faced many trials and come through them all the stronger for it. For a moment, they stood in silence together, the shared grief and loss creating an unspoken bond between them. Finally, Mitsuki broke the silence, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "How did you know the Midoriya family?" she asked, her eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of sadness. Izuku hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I was an old friend of Inko's from another time," he said finally, his voice slow and measured. Mitsuki nodded, accepting his answer without question. "Inko was such a bright and sunny person," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Always smiling, always seeing the good in people. And Hisashi, he could be so silly, always making us laugh with his antics." Izuku listened as Mitsuki spoke, her words painting a vivid picture of the parents he had never known. She spoke of Inko's hopes for her son, how she dreamed he would grow up to be a good man, someone who would make the world a better place. Mitsuki's voice broke, and she started to tear up, her grief raw and palpable. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I miss them so much." Izuku reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "They would be proud of you for keeping their memory alive." Mitsuki cleared her eyes, managing a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. "It means a lot to me to know that people other than myself still visit their grave." Her phone rang, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen inside. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," she said, her voice apologetic. Izuku nodded, watching as she walked away, her phone pressed to her ear. He turned back to the grave, his thoughts once again a tangled web of emotions. The conversation with Mitsuki had given him a glimpse into the lives of his parents, the kind of people they had been, and the love they had for him. It was a bittersweet revelation, bringing both comfort and sorrow. He knelt down, placing the bouquet of lilies on the grave. "I'm sorry I never got to know you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "But I promise I'll make you proud. I'll be the kind of man you would have wanted me to be." As he stood up, the cold mist around him began to dissipate, the chill in the air slowly fading. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he knew that he would face it with the same determination and resolve that had carried him this far. Izuku Midoriya turned away from the grave, his heart a little lighter, and began the walk back to the Hero Commission headquarters. The world was a cold, unforgiving place, but he was determined to be a light that brought warmth and hope, no matter the cost. For his parents, for Mitsuki, and for himself, he would forge his own path and discover the true meaning of justice. Izuku Midoriya stood in the cold, dimly lit basement of the Hero Commission building, facing his handler, Sakura. The air was thick with tension, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the building's machinery and Sakura's enraged voice. She paced back and forth, her eyes blazing with anger as she berated him. "How dare you even think about becoming a traditional hero?" Sakura hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. "You owe everything to the commission. We took you in, trained you, made you what you are today. Without us, you'd be nothing." Izuku stood still, his expression calm and detached. He wore his long, dark blue coat with a plush white fur collar, and his wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, hiding his eyes behind tinted glasses. He listened silently as Sakura continued her tirade, her words growing sharper and more accusatory. "You have a duty, Izuku," she spat. "A duty to repay the commission for everything we've done for you. You don't get to choose your path. You follow orders, and you do as you're told." This went on for several minutes, the room growing colder with each passing second. Finally, Izuku had enough. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses, and he raised a hand, his movements slow and deliberate. With a simple wave, a blast of cold air surged through the room, and Sakura was instantly encased in a thick layer of ice. Her furious expression was frozen in place, her body immobilized. Izuku turned away from her, his face a mask of stoic resolve. As he moved towards the door, the building's heating defense system activated with a loud whir. The door slammed shut, and an alarm blared, echoing through the basement. Flames began to pour out from the walls and the floor in front of him, creating a barrier of intense heat. Izuku remained calm, his eyes taking on a determined look. He extended his hand, and an intricate ice sculpture began to form, growing rapidly and extending towards the wall. The ice glittered in the harsh light, reflecting the flames as it moved with purpose. With a powerful thrust, the sculpture shattered part of the wall, creating an opening. He walked through the gap, the flames licking at the edges, but unable to touch him. As he ascended through the building, he encountered resistance from the commission's agents. Each confrontation was brief and decisive. With a flick of his wrist, he encased his opponents in ice, their weapons and powers rendered useless against his formidable quirk. At one point, he paused, his eyes scanning the chaos around him. He could hear the panicked voices of the agents, their fear palpable. Taking a deep breath, Izuku unleashed a wave of ice that surged through the entire building. The temperature plummeted, and within moments, every corridor, room, and hall was encased in ice. the agents frozen in place like statues. Izuku continued his ascent, his steps unhurried and his resolve unshaken. The once formidable stronghold of the Hero Commission was now a frozen fortress, its power neutralized by his quirk. He reached the top floor, the final barrier between him and his freedom. As he stepped outside, the cold air greeted him like an old friend. He stood at the entrance of the building, his breath visible in the chill. The city stretched out before him, vast and full of possibilities. He took a moment to reflect on his actions, the path that had led him here, and the uncertain future that awaited him. "It's time to find my own justice," Izuku said softly, his voice carrying a note of determination and resolve. He knew that his journey would not be easy, that he would face countless challenges and moral dilemmas. But he was ready to carve his own path, to discover what justice truly meant, not just for the Commission, but for himself. With one last glance at the frozen building, Izuku turned and walked away, his coat billowing in the wind. The city awaited him, a canvas upon which he would paint his vision of justice. He would no longer be a pawn in the Commission's game. He would be a hero on his own terms, a force of nature guided by his own principles. The road ahead was long and fraught with peril, but Izuku Midoriya was undeterred. With the power of ice at his command and a heart full of resolve, he set out to forge his own destiny, one step at a time.